Welcome back to part 2 of my Master's License Guide, where I'm going to help you get all gold and all of the new Master's licenses that were updated in the 1.4 update, also known as Spec 2. Getting right into it, we're going to go to National A of the Master's License test, which is a front-wheel drive car at Dragon Trail Seaside. The elevation changes in the high curbs greatly affect the attitude of the car, so it's really important to just get a really good rhythm and try not to lose too much speed through any of the corners. The beginning of this test is blind, and that's okay though because our car is incredibly slow, so we have a lot of time after we go over the crest to spot the little kink, and we're going to go directly over the curb that's sitting there. Your first and only braking point is right at the end of the barrier right here, right where it turns orange. We're going to brake, but not fully, and we're going to start trail braking in immediately. You're going to notice that I'm on the brakes for a long time. I actually come off a little too early and then add just a tiny bit more brake to make sure that I can hit this apex. As soon as we clip it, we're going to get back on the throttle and continue steering to the left. Keep steering left until we get to the end of the barrier right here. Notice that I'm not steering all the way. If we turn the wheel too much, we will understeer. So when we switch directions, we also have to be careful we don't do that too quickly and we don't go too far with the steering. I've used about the same amount of steering, maybe even a little bit less going to the right. We upshift and stay fully flat on the throttle. You can go completely over the curbs, just go straight over them. It's like you're in a monster truck, but it's just a soft suspension front wheel drive car. We're gonna do the same thing right here, making sure we don't catch the tires on the inside lip of the curb and avoid going all the way off on the exit, and you should be good. Make sure you don't steer too much and you stay fully on the throttle, and you should be able to nail this one pretty easily as long as you can nail the braking zone. As soon as we go over the crest, we look for the kink and go over the curbing that sits right in the middle of it, setting us up for the one braking point. We're going to stay on the brakes for a while, just trying to get the car to continue rotating and turning in, but not losing too much speed. As soon as we get on the throttle, we stay on the throttle, and our goal is just to go straight over these curbs. You don't really have to worry about them changing the attitude of the car. As long as you don't hook the inside tires on the inside lip of the curb, you should be totally fine. As you could probably guess, the next test is actually the exact same as that test we just did, but in a much faster car. This time we've got an RX-7. This car's rear-wheel drive, much more powerful, but hilariously enough, it eats up the curbs just like that last car, so we can do the exact same thing. This is actually a pretty terrible run, but I just want to show you what's capable when it comes to using and abusing the curbs. Again, we go over this kink to set ourselves up for the braking point, which is actually exactly the same. The car's faster, but it's also more capable, so you can brake in the exact same spot. We're going to try to make sure we don't lose too much momentum as we turn in immediately, and when we hit the curb, we're going to get back on the throttle. Beware, because the car does have more power, so it can make you over or understeer pretty easily. Now, as you'll be able to see, I actually apexed too early, got on the throttle really heavily anyways, and I'm way more far to the right than I was with the last car. However, like I said before, the curbs don't really matter with this car. You can still just turn right, use as much of the curb as you want, and you're going to be totally fine. It doesn't really affect the car too much. Even though I hooked the inside tire, it didn't really make the car spin, and we do the exact same thing here. We go as much over the curb as we possibly can. I know it's not a very good example, but if you do anything even close to that, you're going to be able to nail it, because when you see how quick this time was after it being so terrible, you're going to realize it's not very difficult at all. So if you didn't get it quite before, I did make a big mistake, but I really wanted to show how easy it is to get gold in this. We were 4/10 ahead despite the fact that it was completely wrong. On this first braking point, I actually slowed down a little bit too much, which then caused me to get on the throttle too early. So as you can see here, I'm on the throttle and then immediately pushing wide, but I'm still able to stay full throttle, lift just a little bit as I turn in, and then stay full throttle here. If I was a little bit more patient with the throttle, then I wouldn't have to lift whatsoever, and we probably could have gotten a 24 there pretty easily. I'm going to assume that you won't have too much trouble with that one, but this next test can actually be pretty tricky. We've got a heavy and powerful rear-wheel drive sedan going up a hairpin and then down the same hairpin. The elevation changes really make this corner. As we start this challenge, we want to align ourselves on the right side of the track just around the first bend and start looking for these little arrow marker boards on the side of the road. The second one, directly after the 100 meter board on the right, is our braking point. We want to brake right before we get to it. Downshift all the way to third gear and be very, very patient. We want to turn in at the beginning of the curbing there on the outside. There's a little bit of pavement on the inside just past the curb, and right about the middle of that is where we want to apex. That's our clipping point. Exit in 4th gear, and you can see even in a higher gear we still have enough torque to slide a little bit, but it was just a little bit of rotation, which is better than understeering off the track, and from then on we can just drive straight down the hill like normal. I'm not actually sure you need to shift into 5th gear. I didn't try this one very much. It didn't take too long to get the gold, but it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't cost you too much time if you do shift. Going back to full speed, make sure you brake before the arrow sign that we're looking for, and be very patient when it comes to turning in. If you try to turn in too early, you're just going to understeer beyond where you want to be. When it comes to getting on the throttle, you can see I was a little bit rough. I actually blipped the throttle a little bit because I wanted oversteer, but you can just be a little bit more gentle than I am and have plenty of time to make it down the hill. Heavy, powerful cars just require you to be a little bit more patient than usual. Our next challenge is even tougher. We're in a Ferrari F12 Berlinetta in the middle of really narrow Tokyo streets. We're going really fast, and yeah, this car is incredibly powerful. You may have noticed this before, but the developers leave us a lot of clues as to where we should brake and turn in. We're going to look for yellow signs everywhere throughout the track. After we pass the off-ramp on the left, look for this yellow sign here up on the top of the fence. Braking here can cause a lot of understeer, so be careful you're not too close to the wall when you hit the brakes. We're going to look for the next yellow sign on the left for our turn-in. We want to trail brake and make sure that we're not just jumping off the brakes. Another yellow sign on the inside is our clipping point on the inside wall. The next yellow sign shows us where we should track out to, and before the next yellow sign, we're going to look for our braking point, which is where this light and what looks like an electrical box is. Again, the next yellow sign does give us a clue though. That is our turn-in point, but notice I'm going to stay on the brakes and be very, very patient with how quickly I get off. I actually add a little bit more brake pressure, making sure I look for this other yellow sign in the center as our clipping point before getting fully on the throttle again. You can be really brave on the throttle here, but again, looking for the yellow sign as a clipping point, we want to lift so we keep it tucked in, but then back on the throttle trying to hit the next yellow sign. The next yellow sign, again, is our turn-in point, and you'll see that I actually lifted off the throttle way too much. If you see the ghost in my rear view, you can see they lifted way less. Another yellow sign on the inside for a clipping point, but I slowed down way too much there. Despite that, I still got gold, and so there's a lot of time available in this one. Alright, we're going to go over at full speed. Just keep in mind as you watch this that there are yellow signs everywhere telling us when to brake, when to turn in, clipping points, where to track out to. The developers really gave us a lot of hints as to how to finish this one quickly. I think I actually turned in too early on this one, so I apexed too early and had to wait too long to get on the throttle. So I lost too much speed, and that caused me to lose control a little bit, but we did gain it back, only to lose it again on the last corner because I just wasn't brave enough on the throttle. You can see there are a lot of places to gain a lot of time here. This is the toughest one by far so far, so just be very patient with it. It's probably going to take a few tries, but that's okay. Be patient, be gentle. The next test is our first snow challenge, which is a lot of fun. I absolutely love rallying in snow. I love being sideways. I love drifting, but it can be really difficult if you're not used to the whole concept of sliding. As we go into the braking zone, I want you to keep in mind that we're trying to keep the car rotating through the entire corner. A little bit oversteer is what we want. We never want it to understeer, and we really don't want it to be neutral either. After the first Bullet Express billboard up on the left, we're going to turn in first to get the car to start rotating, then apply the brakes, which should shift the weight forward and make the car continue rotating while moving in towards the apex. First things first, I'm going to lift off the throttle as I turn in, so you can see the steering angle as the throttle is about to disappear. That's going to get the car to start rotating. Adding brakes will cause it to tighten up the radius of the turn, but it's also going to make the car rotate, so I'm countersteering just a little bit to make sure I don't rotate a lot. At this point, the car stops rotating, so I've got to neutralize the steering, lift off the brakes again, then apply the brakes and continue steering in towards the apex. Now that I've slowed down enough, I'm going to turn a lot, trail brake off the brakes, and then as the car continues to rotate from coming off the brakes, I'm going to add throttle to continue that slide while accelerating. As I get on the throttle, I then counter steer again to make sure I don't just turn it into a big drift, and as soon as it feels like I've gotten good traction on all four tires, then I can steer like normal and try to straighten myself out to get to the exit. The big key is rotating your car by balancing where the weight goes with the brake and the throttle, and also try not to power slide too much because that's just going to slow you down. A little bit of rotation goes a long way. We're going to go watch it in full speed now. I suggest you watch this a lot, both the breakdown and the full speed, until you feel like you really grasp the concept. Blindly copying inputs is only going to get you so far. When you fully grasp the concept of everything that you're trying to do and how to make that happen, that's when you can start really controlling it and attacking the gold time. Like I keep saying, rotation is very important, but big slides are just really cool looking. They're gonna slow you down a lot. Rotate only as much as you need to, and then try to keep your car going straight as much as you possibly can. Again, be very patient with yourself. In our next test, we have another heavy sedan, but this time we've got all-wheel drive, so it's not going to be nearly as oversteery and sketchy as the last ones. The biggest thing you need to look out for in this is on the left-hand high-speed S. If you touch the dirt at all, you're going to instantly get disqualified, so avoid that at all costs. Setting up for the first left-hander, you can really just go to the middle of the track. You don't have to go super wide, but we want to hug the inside until we get beyond this bridge. Watch my inputs carefully. What I'm going to do is after passing under the bridge, turn in, wait until the car's shifted weight, and then lift off the throttle before getting back on it and continue steering to the right. We are going to experience a little bit of understeer, but that'll disappear pretty quickly. Since I did understeer a little too much, I also apexed too early here, which shot me far out to the right, but it's okay because I just straightened the car out before I brake, which is right after the 400 board on the left. It would be better if we were fully aligned to the left, but keeping up that speed is more important. Continue braking, downshift all the way to third gear, and start turning in at the 100 meter board on the left. Once we get really close to the inside, we're going to fully lift off the brake, turn in, and then get back on that throttle. If you were patient enough, the car shouldn't understeer, and even if it feels like you're going way to the edge of the track, the car should gain more grip before you get there, and you should be able to straighten out and go to the exit. Even with that sketchy part before the final braking zone, we still ended up 4/10 clear, so I don't really think the bar is very high on this challenge. As we go over this full speed, I'll point out where I made the big mistake, but honestly, you can mess up a lot of this and still get gold pretty easily. Like I said, the bar is not very high. What happens is I turned in too early and then ended up lifting off at the right time, but that means I apexed too early there, and it's a cascading effect. I apexed too early there, and then I'm too far away from the left side of the track. I managed to turn in at about the right point, and I got on the throttle really cleanly, so we ended up even faster than the Ghost despite the fact that we really messed it up. So yeah, this one shouldn't be too hard for you, but let me know if you have any questions about it. For A7, we get to drive a really wonderful M3, and it's at a really tricky part of Dragon Trail, but all the switchbacks feel really nice in a BMW. Like any kind of track that has switchbacks or S's, it's all about rhythm and patience. As we start, use this curve to position yourself as far to the right as we can, and at the end of the barrier, the orange mark is where we turn in. I had to lift just a little bit, and then I lifted even more because I caught a weird bounce, but we still kept up enough momentum. We're trying to get to the left side of the track here. Look to this orange part of the barrier for our braking point. I want you to notice that I'm switching directions by changing the steering direction, and as it goes through neutral steering, that's when I add brake. Braking just enough to slow us down and also tuck the nose in over this curb. We're going to get back on the throttle as soon as we go over it. Like with the brake, we're only using as much throttle as we can possibly use without changing the trajectory of the car. We're trying to get ourselves all the way to the right. This orange part of the barrier is where we should switch back. I was a little bit late, but as we switch back, we're going to lift, add a little bit of brakes to rotate the car. I rotated too much, missed the apex, but it was still enough speed that I can get back on the throttle, track out all the way onto this curb, which can be scary if you hit it weird, and then we're pretty much done by that point. As we go and watch at full speed, I want you to notice that I'm never going full throttle or full brake immediately. The brakes and the throttle primarily serve to slow the car down and accelerate, but the secondary function is to control where the weight goes. I want you to notice how in conjunction with the steering, using the pedals to make sure that you can manipulate the weight is just as important as knowing when to accelerate and decelerate. I obviously lost a lot of time completely missing that apex, but the fact that we still got half a second past gold means that there's a lot of margin for error in this one. The GTR in the next test is another all-wheel drive car, but this time it's actually a sports car, so you don't have to worry about nearly as much understeer as that Genesis. This is one of the most used original Gran Turismo tracks, and one of the funniest features about it is that you have to absolutely destroy the track limits as much as you can, which you'll see up ahead. The very first braking point is very shortly after it starts. Get all the way up on the curb, and this very first white line that you see after the curb is where you want to brake. 2 more white lines will pass, and that is when you want to turn in. We need to trail brake, of course, but you need to get off the brakes as soon as you can to free up the front tires for turning. We want to go all the way over the curb here, putting just the right tires on the red and white portion. Take note that I'm still steering to the left until I'm approximately halfway between the two corners, and then I turn all the way to the right. No need to neutralize the steering between the two corners. I'm again trying to eat up as much of the curb as I possibly can, continuing to steer afterwards, and then when we get to this one, we do the same thing, but you're probably going to have to lift. The earlier you can lift, the better. This should also be possible to do without lifting, but of course that's just going to take trial and error. When you have to lift for a really long exit, it's definitely best to lift as early as you can so you have as long as possible on the throttle. Be careful to steer enough that you're not going all the way into the grass and the wall, and you should be all set here. The two main things I want you to focus on are, one, how late I'm apexing each of the curves, as well as how quickly I'm going from left to right and right to left when I'm steering. You don't want to neutralize the steering in between corners. I see a lot of beginner drivers go from left to center to right when they try to go from a left curve to a right curve, and that just adds a lot of time. If you go directly from one corner to the next, it's going to be a lot more efficient and a lot quicker. For the penultimate test of the Master A license, we get to drive in the rain, and it's not just a simple start and stop this time. Not only do you have to negotiate actually braking, trail braking, cornering, and accelerating out of a corner, you also have to deal with the fact that there is a simulated drying line in Gran Turismo 7. After it rains in the game and it starts drying up, where the cars drive in general, it starts drying up first because of course the tires are displacing the water. That effect is unfortunately artificial because where the cars drive doesn't actually matter. You can have an entire lobby of people driving on the right side of the track here, but where we are right now is going to be the drying line. Standing water and puddles can also be an issue, but in general, where the track is darker, that's where you're going to find the most grip. Our one and only braking zone is at this line before the 150 meter board. You can just go to 100% brake if you want to, but because it's rainy, if you have any kind of steering locked in, you're going to spin or slide at least a little bit. So be careful on the brakes. You can always relieve the brake pressure a little bit, pump the brakes to try to gain grip, but the ABS is pretty good. Your trail braking skills will be tested here. You have to constantly search for the grip, but a cheeky downshift can get the rear tires to slow down a little bit quicker, which can cause you to rotate. But if you do that too early, you'll just spin out. I like to keep in mind that everything I'm doing when I'm driving a car in the rain should be considered more of a request than a command. If you give the car time to respond, then it's going to be nice to you. And if you try to demand it does more than it can, that's when you're going to hit a wall. Now you may notice that I'm barely touching the curb, and if you know anything about rain driving, that is an absolute no-no. On top of it being a curb, it's also part of the wet part of the track, so it's kind of a double whammy. But I want you to pay attention to what I do with the throttle. I'm not going to lift off, I'm not going to touch the brakes. When the car starts sliding, I've got to transfer more weight to the back of the car, especially since it's a rear engine car, and that's actually going to put more weight over the rear tires and allow us to continue. Simply flooring it when you start sliding in a car isn't always the answer, but if it's a moderate slide and you've got enough speed, then it can just help transfer weight to the rear tires like you just saw. If you've gotten to this point in sim racing or real life racing, you've probably heard the term slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and that really does apply, especially in rain racing. I want you to pay attention to my inputs, and I want you to notice that I'm going a lot slower when I'm initially doing things. However, when things go wrong, you've got to be really quick about it. The main differences between wet driving and dry driving is that everything's going to be going a lot slower. So you just got to be a lot more careful, be deliberate with your inputs, and of course, watch where you put your tires. I live in Oregon and drive only rear-wheel drive cars, so this test was just kind of like a Tuesday to me. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about rain driving though. I know it's tough. And now we have the final challenge of the Master National A test. We have an extremely powerful AMG, and I really like this one, but it is exceptionally tough. As soon as it starts, we're going to want to move over to the left side of the track to prepare for the braking zone because it comes up really quickly. You'll see this 100 meter board here on the left, and right after the orange part of the fence is when we're going to hit the brakes. Brake in a straight line, get to 4th gear, and then keep your eyes open for the 50 meter board on the left. That's when we're going to start turning in and trail braking. This is a downhill corner and we're going pretty fast, so you're going to have to be very careful that you're really controlling where the car is going using the steering and the brake. Guide your car onto the inside curbing and aim for the outside curbing, of course making sure you don't go all the way into the grass because that will definitely at least make you slide and slow down. Worst case scenario, you'll slide out entirely there. There are some very convenient tire marks right here. We're going to brake very gently and try to follow them as we turn in and try to ride up onto the next curb. The goal is to gently brake just enough to guide us onto the curb right where we can see this red square on the fence right here. We want to get on the throttle, but our goal is to get to about the center of the track when we see the next red dot, and I'm going to pause when we get to there again. If you add too much throttle, it'll push you far to the left. If you don't add enough, it'll push you too far to the right, which will be too slow. In a lot of cases, it would make sense to be all the way to the right in order to set up for a really good left-hand corner. However, the area afterwards where you're on the throttle is so short that it's more important to carry a lot of speed through there and just set up for the corner afterwards. Lift as you turn in and add only enough brakes to make sure that you go all the way up on this curb here. Like all switchbacks, we're going to end up in the middle of the road, and we can look for these nice convenient tire marks to know when we want to turn in again. Again, we're adding just enough brakes to follow the line, but we are going to downshift here, and this is where things get tricky. A lot of people go really wide all the way to the outside part of the track right here, and that's actually not what you want to do. Since there's another series of corners afterwards, we don't need to get a really big run into the next corner. What we want to do is stay just about in the middle of the track, staying pretty tight so we can get really close and early on the next apex. Sneak in a little bit of throttle if you can, but keep your eyes on the next corner because we want to get right up onto this curb right here. I gave it a lot of throttle right there just to rotate the car. I wouldn't suggest doing that if you're not super used to the technique. If you didn't rotate your car, or if you got on the throttle too early, you might go directly over this curb here on the left, and that can send you all the way to the grass on the right. We want to bump it while steering left already, and then of course lift off the throttle as much as we can so we can hit this next left turn apex. From here we want to accelerate as much as we can, of course without going into the grass. Hitting this outside curb is okay, you do not need to go all the way wide to this left-hand curb. Going really wide to the left here would allow us to get a really good run into the next straight, but even when it comes to a race and wheel to wheel, that's sometimes overkill. That's a discussion for another time, but especially since the finish of this is actually really close after the exit of this corner, it's just going to waste time if we set up really wide here. The key to this right-hander is staying really close to it as long as you can. We can see that first red dot, there's going to be another red dot right about the center, and that's when we want to apex. Shortly after that, we can get fully on the throttle and you can go directly over this curb here on the exit. Make sure you give yourself enough space so you're turning left already by the time you hit that, or you will go off into the grass because this car is extremely powerful. But if you were patient on the exit, you can just floor it all the way to the finish and you're all set. Consider that a very imperfect run, and we were still more than a second clear of gold, so as you can see there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of margin for error. Going through this full speed, there's not a lot I can say because everything comes up really quickly, but just be really patient with the throttle. This car has race car power, but it doesn't have race car aerodynamics, weight, or suspension. It is a road car, so you're going to have to brake really, really early and be really gentle on the throttle. If you're used to driving like the Group 3 cars, you're probably going to miss and overshoot your braking zones. So again, just be really patient with this and have fun with it. This is really a fun car to drive. And this track is, I guess it's kind of controversial. Not everyone loves it, but I think this is one of the best sectors in racing. As the tests get harder, it's probably going to take some of you a lot longer to finish the tests, and that's okay. I definitely suggest watching this guide and watching any other guide you can find as many times as you can to really compare what you're doing to what I've done and what other people are doing, and so you can see exactly what you're doing wrong. That's about it for the Master A license. Please let me know your thoughts if you think I need to add or subtract detail, and don't forget to like and subscribe because I'm going to make a guide for all of the Master licenses. Thank you.